We've got a really unique panel this morning for you in the outdoor design space. So my name is Kurt Rapp. I'm with a company called Tile Doctor, and I'll let each of them introduce themselves, but we've got Randy Angel, Kurt Kreisinger, and Bo Barnett. So I'll let them take the introduction, start with Randy. Just explain a little bit about what you do.
Good morning. I'm Randy Angel. My company is Randy Angel Designs. I'm out of the Dallas area, and we specialize in outdoor design, swimming pools, outdoor living, some architectural design and whatnot. Designing now kind of all over the country, but I've been in the outdoor design industry since about 1986, so had a long history in material selections and doing new and innovative things over the years. So I'm happy to be here with you guys this morning.
I'm Kurt Kreisinger with Lorax Design Group. I founded the company back in 2009. I've been in the industry for over 27 years. Being a landscape architect, we do both residential and commercial properties all throughout the U.S. and internationally. So therefore, we focus on primarily outdoor spaces. But about 12 years ago, we got really into the swimming pool design. And that's led us across all the markets that we're in, from high-end residential, multifamily, resorts, hotel, hospitality, all those things that really relegate outdoor environments. And so material selection is a big thing that we usually get into. And it's fun I'm glad that we're here at the show. A lot of great products out here, things we've seen before and things that we haven't, but those are the type of elements that we are seeing more of a trend in the environment. So we're really happy to be a part of this conversation this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, my name's Bo Barnett. I'm out of Austin, Texas. Been in the design and build. I've owned KB Custom Pools for 17 years. I've been doing this for 20. We design the pools, we construct the pools. We do everything from fire features, water shapes, casitas, cabanas, pretty much anything outdoor. We're seeing some of the different trends go from glasses to porcelains and different things, and I think that's what's really motivated me as a designer to come to a show like this, to not just be at your traditional regional shows, seeing a very small, small gamut of what's actually available out there. A show like this will provide more of a worldwide reach on materials and things where we as builders and designers can push the envelope. So that's really what I'm excited about. Appreciate being here.
So, and to that point, this is really the first part of this is kind of a three-prong. I'm going to let each of them kind of comment on this as to what they identify with, but it's about letting the materials guide the design, the wet areas versus decking and versus areas in pool. And then I'd like each to kind of explain their experiences they have relative to their integration of materials and the design vision and performances required and how to meet those customer expectations. Just some examples of that. And then limitations they've encountered and how they've at times overcome with material shortfalls or workarounds that they've experienced that seem to work for them, because sometimes the client's vision doesn't always marry up with the materials. So I think they'll have some interesting comments there. And then times that maybe they've been surprised by the materials that they've enabled them to go beyond the expectations, sort of the other side of that. So if you guys can kind of comment on that. I know it's a handful, but whatever you identify with. Okay?
Okay, I don't know where to start with that. I'll just kind of go back to my history with the design in relation to outdoor and selecting materials has always been to try to think outside the box. To work with my various suppliers to source those materials that are not, were not commonly used with outdoor design, getting away from things that are, specifically marketed to the pool industry, for example. So throughout the years, seeing the difference in the materials that are being produced that are, specifically now being geared more towards outdoor design, especially with the large format porcelain and things like that, that allow us to do things that we never could do before, especially with, within the wet materials area. When you're using natural stones and things like that, you have potential issues that can arise with that. Whereas working with the large format porcelains can give you that stone kind of look, but with the durability of the porcelain and not having to deal with some of the issues that come along with the water contact with the stone.
And I know, Randy, you were one of the first pools I ever saw, because he always loved the encaustic tiles, is what I remember you told me, but they never were suitable for that environment. And now all of a sudden we're printing porcelains to look like those looks, those ancient looks, and he incorporated those into some feature walls and some other areas of your design. So
Yeah, that was one of the, it was searching for materials for a client that had a vision for their project, and they loved the look of encaustic tiles, and we were doing a raised wall with a water feature. And in the Dallas area, you have the freeze-thaw issues that you have to be concerned about, and the cement tiles don't work when in contact with the water like that. And so, to see now they're producing these encaustic look tiles in a porcelain, suddenly it opens up a new avenue for me in design where I can include that aesthetic in my project, have it go down into the water and not be concerned about it. So it's really, seeing all of those advancements within the materials market opens up a lot of new opportunities as far as the design.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
Kurt, I know you've been involved in the 2 and 3 cm from the exterior work from the very beginning, specifying it as an architect. So.
Yeah, and on the commercial side, we weren't foreign to that, because when you're working on products all throughout the country and you got different disciplines, interior designers and architects that are used to seeing these materials, they have a little bit more application because they're in tune with going to AIA conferences, ASLA conferences, things like that. But when you get to the high-end residential, that's where I think that was kind of the crevice that had not been split open, and people will be able to see what the possibilities are. So a lot of our clients, you'd go to their house and they would talk about local materials that their neighbor had or friends, but you had other people that were well-traveled, that had been all around the world, that had seen other things in Dubai or Taiwan or Hawaii, wherever it may be. And so it was about 10 years ago that we started a showroom in our own facility, and we said, well, if we're going to be in this industry and we're going to influence people and be able to give them what they want or some fresh new look, then we thought we're going to actually bring it to them instead of just taking them throughout our showrooms in Kansas City. So what we started doing is started bringing those materials in from internationally and all over the regions throughout the United States. And now our high-end residential clients, when they come in, they're uniquely surprised. And so I'm surprised that not other designers aren't doing that with the people that are right there in their own region. But that's where porcelain, we've been using it for years on on commercial projects, but a lot of it was just being used on rooftop terraces and pedestal systems. But it hasn't been to the onset of the last couple of years that now where they're being used on feature walls and in pools. And to me, it's exciting to see that shift, that pendulum has kind of shifted back into the high-end residential market. So it's been good for us.
For us, we're mostly residential, about 90%. And, as a designer, I always felt like I was really constrained by what the pool industry offered as their high-end products. And, really my design started taking off when the education became my primary focus, because I started learning what is an acceptable submersible material that's not going to be affected by thermal shock and some of the things that we're dealing with when we have a spa that's overflowing. It's 20 degrees outside, and all of a sudden the outside of that spa, because it no longer flows over, becomes 20 degrees, and inside it's 104. And so what are acceptable materials, what has been test proven but not necessarily used yet in a submersible environment. And that's when, last year when we visited Italy, it was, for me, very inspirational to understand some of the other products that are available around the world that are impervious, that are high traffic, that are very great, exotic materials, but just nobody's really used that in an aquatic environment very much yet. And so, I started doing that, and, eyebrows are getting raised every time I introduce it to a homeowner. Like, nobody else in our region is really considering those applications. And at first, it was actually difficult to find, some of the right adhesion companies that wanted to back, and support the application of some of these new materials in a new aquatic environment. And we found our folks that support us very much, and now we're very confident in what we do, and we're able to produce something that literally a lot of people have never even seen before. I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, and Bo, like he said, visited Trusai this last year and was quite impressed and surprised by some of the large panels that he's actually pioneered that. In a later presentation today, the very next one in the same room, we're going to show some slides on some of his pools that are pretty dramatic. Whenever I've shown those pools to people, some people that are very high up in the industry per se, they're very shocked at what you've been able to achieve. So that's a good example really of taking this product that's fairly new to us, the thin porcelain panels, and putting it in an environment that is the most stressful there is and being successful at it. So that's part of the letting the materials guide the design. You're able to pull that off now where you couldn't before. So we're going to get into some specific slides here in a minute as to various things like feature walls and fire features and all the elements, seating areas, the sunken seating areas and things. But kind of the last thing here I'd like each to comment on is really how they select the appropriate tile. Each person's process for guiding the selections with the customers, and maybe the past educational processes, whether it's a trade show or is there something you've attended. I think you've had NTCA training in the panels and things like that. So if you can kind of go into that a little bit, and then also talk about where you've pushed the edge a little bit on that. So.
Well, for me, again, I go back to education first, because if you don't know the performance of your material, you don't know how it's going to react to the environment you're putting it in, you're putting yourself and and your client in a compromised position. So first we talk about what the client's vision is, what is their style, how are they going to use the backyard, what are they trying to achieve, and then if they do want to go with more exotic materials or something that's outside of the norm, they really need to be explained how it's going to perform. So if I have a 108-degree August in Texas, you're going to run a perimeter overflow spa 24 hours a day. We want the tile insulated all the time. And now with the variable speed motors, the electrical consumption is very small, so it's not.
So why do you run it 24 hours? Help them understand.
Well, what that's going to do, it's
wall.
going to insulate the actual. If you pick black tile in August in Texas, that black tile is going to heat up to 250 degrees. Then you'll get expansion, which causes the adhesion to give. And you may or may not have a failure, but it's also understanding if your spa's not overflowing and you have a black glass and you have a 3-year-old that comes up and puts their hand on the top of that black glass or a granite or a marble, they're going to burn themselves significantly. And so it's not just the pretty parts of what you're doing, it's really the performance of the entire backyard. Fire features are great, but if you have an exploring 3-year-old and you just had an afternoon party and that thing's been roaring and you don't know that the copper fixture that's surrounding it is going to heat up, that's a danger for a child. And so those things, it's not that you can't design those things in a responsible way, but you definitely need to educate those folks that have never had an outdoor environment so that they understand, again, what the features are going to perform like, what the materials are going to perform like, and that helps them set the correct expectations. And then as an installer, it's up to me to make sure that those expectations are met and we're able to, produce that product to where it won't fail.
And so, Kurt, you said you opened up your own showroom within your own facility. So talk about that selection process. Do you go outside of that, or everything comes inside?
Oh, yeah. So it used to be that a lot of our clients had a lot of them built homes before, and it takes time, a lot of energy. And as a responsible landscape architect, I didn't just want to stop at the design process. I wanted to be able to take them through the construction document process, but also see the project get implemented. And as part of that process, I had spent a lot of hours with clients driving all over town to different showrooms and tile as an example. We'd go to 4 different showrooms. It'd take an entire day to do so. It was like having a kid in a candy store. Clients walking through the door and they're like, oh, I like this and I like this. This is shiny, this is bright. And I'm like, you need to ignore all this stuff. You need to put blinders on, because the only area that's actually acceptable to pool environments is way back in the corner, and they have 2 brands, you know? And you get back there and they get disappointed. And then they would all of a sudden go, wow, what's next? I'm like, well, you need to ignore everything else here. Even the colors, don't even worry about it. Let's go to the next place. And so I'd spend a whole day with them, just taking them all over town. And you could tell they were getting frustrated. So 10 years ago, we opened up our own facility. And so we did our own research. And that was one of the things I was going to say, is that part of being a designer or a supplier or being in the industry in general, you got to get out. You have to come to shows like this and see what's new. Because as a designer, we spec what we know, right? Mm-hmm. So if there's a lot of people out in the industry that are, reps for these companies, and they're going around and pounding on different doors, they're not pounding on all the doors, because I don't see a lot of people come by and show us all the newest products. We see some, but we're not seeing all the cool things like you see here. So you got to get out and see this stuff. So what we did is we brought in all those materials to our space so that we could actually see what it is. And within inside of an hour and a half after meeting a client, we're not only making selections for the tile on with a water line or the infinity edge, but we're all selecting materials for the pool deck and veneers. I mean, we're doing everything within an hour and a half. And their clients are like, this is the most thoughtful. And we're also narrowing down the selections. Yeah. For us, it's also different too than what Randy and Bo have. I mean, they're both in Texas, so their circumstances are different than ours. We have freeze thaw in Kansas City. I mean, I've heard that, we're one of the most delicate and most challenging places in the United States because of our freeze thaw cycles. We could have so many during the course of a winter. And so that's where I've been, like, not as courageous as Bo to really be out there and do something really spectacular, because they're dealing with heat. But we're dealing with both. I mean, in Kansas, we get the extreme of all 4 seasons. So in the summer, we could be up to 110 degrees. Maybe that's only for, a couple days. And other days, we'll hit 100 for a whole week. But then in the winter times, we'll drop 20 below zero. So we got to see both ends of that spectrum. So in our showrooms, we have to show clients what's acceptable, what's questionable. And those things that are questionable are finding the right trades that we can work with, the vendors that could help us find the applications or the materials to stick these things and stand behind them. So it's a big deciding factor for our clients.
Yeah.
And I know, Randy, you typically don't shop at your pool supply tile places. You look for things outside. So talk about your process.
Yeah, and I think, to echo some of what Kurt had said, the educating, whether you're a designer, you have a showroom, you're a manufacturer, it's about seeking the information for that proper usage of tile. Within our design company, we do everything from swimming pool design, outdoor design, but we also do a lot of architecture. All of our projects, or most of them, include some form of a pool cabana, guest house, true living areas. And so when we specify materials, it is materials that are going from an interior space, transitioning to an outdoor space, transitioning to a water element. And so we have to know what materials can we utilize for each of these different areas. I rely heavily on my showrooms, tile suppliers that I go to. I remember, the process that I've seen over the course of my career has gone from me asking the questions about, if a material is rated properly for pool usage in our area, and having the salesperson at the tile showroom look at me like, I'm from Mars or something. They had no idea what I was asking. And now, thankfully, the tile manufacturers are doing a much better job at educating the suppliers so that they have the information at the ready when you're looking at, specifying a material for a certain location. But definitely teaming yourself up with, with a supplier or showroom that can help guide you in those decisions is very valuable. But it's, to take the clients out and be able to kind of narrow down that that window of what is appropriate, I will typically go out and gather the materials that I envision for the project to, keep the blinders on them and not overwhelm them with all of those decisions out there. But that's kind of my process with it.
So the three here on this panel are all a member of Tributary Revelation. It's a group of professionals, it's 50 or 60 now, I don't know what the number is, sorry.
Around
but
50.
have gotten together and really tried to take their trade to the next level. There's a lot of education in the pool space. I spent a number of years just kind of ignoring the pool side of things. It was 70 square feet of tile. I didn't pay much attention to it. But we started to really see the growth and everything really take off where these installations are very significant now. We've got, a pool in Rhode Island that's got $1 million worth of glass in it that's going right now. But so a little bit about the education. Tributary was founded to bring that up to another level, but I know you have like Genesis and there's Water Shapes University. Can you just quickly hit a little bit on where you see value there and explain to them what you think they might want to look into or at least touch on?
So being a landscape architect and being in the industry for 27 years, I know a lot of other LAs around the country. And getting to talk to them, I was really surprised when we started getting into the pool industry and the pool design, how few landscape architects really understand the pool industry. They would draw pretty pictures, but they didn't really understand how it worked, or they didn't specify the materials. They kind of stayed out of that realm. And so when I was first introduced to education about swimming pools, I heard about Genesis program that had been started, I think, back in like 1989 by 3 gentlemen. And I think it was pretty revolutionary. They started because they wanted to actually talk about, what is not being talked about in the pool industry and how you educate people how to design, do construction documents and details, and build the pool the right way. But they also talk about things outside of the pool, but it's specifically about pools. So I went and took that program, and 2 years later, I was just blown away. I was meeting a lot of people like these gentlemen at these shows, and I was like, I get excited for that week that I'm gone, but then I would go back and I get disappointed because like the people in my own community, other landscape architects or contractors just were not that passionate about what they were doing. So several years later, I realized, I'm excited and I like what I feel like when I come to these shows and surround myself with those type of people. So I'm like, I'm going to go pitch this idea to 2 of my friends. And it was 2 other pool builders at the time. One was in Georgia and one was in Phoenix. And I'd flown to each of the locations and pitched the idea about starting this new organization. And it was about bringing professionals like these guys, designers, contractors, landscape architects, tile setters, people that are really passionate about what they do, the trades that really need to be out there promoting the industry and lifting up selection of materials, constructability, sustainability, the things that really, we see pools and outdoor environments as pretty environments, but how do you maintain them? How sustainable are they, environmentally friendly? So we wanted to, there is programs like Genesis and now Watershape University, which has been, it's transformed. There's some guys that left Genesis to start Watershape University. Those are more educational platforms. Tributary was started not to only educate in a classroom setting, but to do it outside the classroom. So we team with different vendors and manufacturers and companies like Kurt Rapps and Lidecol and companies like that want to bring us into the fold, learn what we've learned out in the field, so their research and development teams can actually learn from what we're seeing out in the real world, while they can learn from that, but we're also going behind the scenes and seeing how products are manufactured, why they do what they do, getting to go see projects and installations to get a hands-on approach to actual education. So to me, I'm more of a tangible guy, touch and feel, and that's how I learn, instead of sitting in the bowels of a building, in a large conference center. This is a good platform, but you got to get out and get your feet on the ground and talk to people and see the product. So that's what we did, and we started that like 10 years ago, and we've got about 50 members representatives from all over the country, and I think we've got like 15 or 16 sponsors, both nationally and internationally. So I think it's a great platform, and we've really enjoyed the camaraderie of the people we've learned and met over the years, but just the things that we've seen too. So.
Well, I would say that, I find it invaluable. I mean, it's priceless to me, the group is. And the reason for me, I was never good in school. I would sit there and draw on the back of a classroom and not retain any of it and not do well in tests. And I've been through the Genesis training. And it was hard for me to understand hydraulic engineering because I'm not great at math. But when you sit at a table and you're listening to a presentation, you're watching these slides, that's hard enough. When I'm able to travel with guys that have more experience, they've already seen this and done this, and oh, by the way, we're going to talk about hydraulic engineering, but we're going to take you to this pool and we're going to show you how it works. And we're going to not only show you how it works, but we're going to show you what we failed at. And we're going to teach you how to not make those same failures if you're going to attack a design that's overly complicated. And that's what started giving me the confidence to push the envelope, is that I can call Kurt and I'll be like, hey dude, I've got this thing that I can't figure out. Between 2 phone calls, we've got it figured out. And everyone in the group is so happy to help. And the guys at Genesis and Watershape are too, but that's a phone call that's a little bit more of a student-teacher relationship than calling a buddy who you trust with your family and asking him a question and you know that the information that he's given you is not only good, but he's been through it. It's not just out of a book. He's done that. He's executed that. And so that's where, the travel is great because, again, you get to see, touch, feel the materials that you want to implement, but the relationships that are built through that process, for me, are the most valuable part of it because, again, it's resources to some of the sharpest minds in the entire industry that, again, can help you diagnose and pre-plan for projects that you may have never even thought about doing yet. And so that was again priceless for me to be able to have access to that group, so that I could grow and then eventually be a part of that group to where I can contribute.
So we're going to get into some actual slides of some installations. Each have submitted some that they want to talk about. So now it's going to get a little bit more visual. So we've had enough discussion, I guess. Appreciate you sticking through that. So we're going to start with feature walls. There's really just a few things here that we're going to go through. Feature walls, fire features, infinity edge, sunken seating, and then decking. And some of them we have 2 slides on and some just 1. But each have submitted a photo of something in particular, like I said, they want to speak to. So you want to start, Randy, on
Sure.
yours?
So mine is the tall water feature there. And this photo actually kind of speaks to one of the elements that I mentioned earlier as far as, working with natural stone materials around a water feature. One of the things that you have to consider is how is that water going to affect that natural stone? And you can even see kind of in the bottom of that where the waterfall is hitting the water, the stone at the bottom is a little bit darker because that water is splashing up on the stone. And I've had projects that, were a little of an education for me when I used a soft limestone material on a wall with a water feature and, come back a couple months later and that stone is just destroyed from the water. In this case, it works well. It's a little harder stone, not being affected because the water is being projected away from the stone itself. But there are so many options now for what you can use on these wall claddings when there is water involved. But in a lot of my projects, I've really moved more towards utilizing the various porcelain materials, and kind of going back to the education and the relationships with my suppliers and showrooms. Hi, Candace. One of my favorite suppliers is here. I'm always looking for those new materials and developing the relationship with the different showrooms and whatnot. And, Candace will call me, send me an email with, dude, check out this new product. And one of the new things that we came across a couple years ago was a porcelain ledge stone, and this was the first time I'd ever seen such a thing. So now suddenly I have a material that can give me that look of, that thin ledge stone for a feature wall that I wanted to do, but it's porcelain. So the water feature is not going to impact the look of that wall over time. And so that's, some of the things that you have to think through when you're dealing with these water areas is how is the water going to affect that material? And make sure that you're utilizing material that is not going to be negatively affected and ruin the look of that feature wall.
What do you got for us?
So mine's in the pictures, the bottom left of the screen, the tall water wall. So this particular client was building a lodge-style home north of Kansas City, and he wanted to feel more resort-like. Fortunate enough, we have a stone in our local region, just south in Oklahoma and Arkansas, that kind of married up with some of his expectations of what he wanted this lodge stone to look like on his house, and we wanted to blend that out into the landscape. So, but the challenge is anytime you're dealing with water, like Randy's talking about it, you're dealing with, the possibility that you may have some failure. Fortunately enough, we did a lot of research. This type of stone can come in contact with water. It wasn't going to be fully submerged, but it was going to have water trailing across it a good portion of the time the water's the infinity edge is running. So we had to, it's working with the mason, work with the manufacturers to figure out what's the right product to adhere this to the wall to get the outlook that they actually wanted. They just didn't want water like going down the face of a porcelain or a tile with nice clean class, water technique and shimmering. They wanted something that actually is going to hit the rock and break it up and create interest. In an audible noise, it's a little bit different. So this is an application where we did use stone, but we're sometimes hesitant because clients are wanting to use a soft limestone, and that's where we just have to say no. That's just not a good solution. There's other opportunities like the new porcelains that look like stone that have those applications where it's like, hey, that's a great selection, still achieve the overall aesthetic. So.
Mine is the top left, and the reason I chose this was for several reasons. The design itself was a very modern, sharp lines, but the client wanted to use a local natural stone because their house finishes were pretty rustic. They have a steel fence in the background, so we chose limestone, and we made a mistake by choosing limestone. Because what we did is we brought the limestone on so that's a spa that you're looking at, and the black part is a spillway. So we used limestone on the inside of the spa, on the outside of the spa, and then we mitered the edges to make it look very sharp. We ended up having micro molding that happened under the water and started to turn black on us after about a year. And so what we ended up having to do, porcelain would have been a perfect fit for what they were trying to do. But again, this was 6 or 7 years ago, and I didn't know about it yet. So what we ended up doing is drying everything out. We repolished the stone, and then we sealed it. The sealer, after a year, yellowed a bit. So they were okay with it. We didn't have to redo it after that. But it's just something that I learned that traditionally, soft white limestone, if it's sealed, it's going to yellow because of the UV. This is another example, too, of the black tile scenario. Again, your kid walks up and touches that spillway right there at 108-degree temperature. That's a very reflective glass tile on one side, and it's solid black at another angle. It can be extremely hot. Another thing that's very important that I've learned over the years is we actually do all epoxy adhesion methods now, including the grout. And what that's done for us, especially on black applications, is reduce the efflorescence of the calcium being pulled through the actual cementitious grout. So now all the white, scummy white lines that you have to either scrape off or get removed, they're reduced dramatically. In addition to that, we found that to be a much better waterproofing solution, especially on a negative edge or a spillway that has water on both sides. Because traditionally, if you have a failure, you're going to see the white calcium almost immediately. So again, it's an environment to where through that process, we've learned that epoxy is one of the best practices, for tile adhesion and then protecting that tile. And again, in this particular example, it's about that education process. Now, I wouldn't suggest anyone using limestone in the pool in that fashion. I would introduce the porcelain material to them. and that would give them a much better longevity performance for their material selection.
So here's 3 more feature walls. So we can talk about each is there.
So mine on this one is the one with the green panels. And we used a combination of materials on this one. This has a large, what's called a rain curtain waterfall coming down through that center. And behind that, this is actually one where we were able to use that porcelain ledge stone look for that wall behind the water feature. And then the shelf across the top, we were able to use the large format porcelain tile with mitered edges so that up close that shelf looks like it's just a huge slab of granite that comes out from the wall. So this was a fun project to be able to incorporate some new materials that are available now.
Cool.
Mine's the image to the left with the sunken seating area and the feature wall in the back. So this was a client that was renovating a house, ended up being a complete remodel, that tore it down in the studs, redid everything, but he wanted a contemporary craftsman aesthetic. And we took the stone that we had selected for the house, we also blended into the outdoor environment where it was used in the pool deck, it was used in veneer applications, different articulations on the fireplace and columns, and we finished the stone in like 4 different ways. So that's the great thing about stone, is that you could take one piece of a block of material and you can have it honed, sanded, saw cut, rock faced, bush hammered. We had all those in this application, but the feature wall was something we hadn't done before, and I had done a lot of research, and what this is large quarried dimensional stone slabs or blocks, and each of these were like over 1,000 pounds. So once these were set in place, we're like, the product that's in the middle is a glass slag rock that's in behind like a gabion basket. And the idea was that we wanted all that glass to illuminate the same. And the lighting designer, I was explaining what I wanted. At the time, LEDs were still, this was 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, LEDs were still coming on the marketplace, and like they didn't have the dimming option. They only had so many limitations. And I thought the light would actually go all the way through and make it seamless. Although now you got like 8 hot spots, which it still works, and it's beautiful during the day. It's like an emerald glass slag rock. But the feature, it works, but again, it's the things that you learn when you go through this process, and when you start putting those stones on the top, like, we're not going to remove those easily. It's kind of done. The equipment's gone, and it was too late. But it was fun to try and figure it out. So
That's awesome. Mine's at the top there. This pool was actually a renovation. They had 150 cedar trees behind their swimming pool, and they just had normal cool coat with flagstone coping, and the pool just really didn't fit very well. They wanted a very modern contemporary style, but they still wanted to introduce some of the natural tones to it. So we did a porcelain finish on the deck. That's actually a porcelain wood that we used on the deck. And then on the feature wall itself, because when we cleaned up all the trees and left the oaks, we intended on uplighting all of the oaks. So the back wall on that pool actually has a peekaboo window that you can see the trees behind it. And in that window, there's actually a thin fire stick that's basically 12 inches wide that allows the fire to not reach the top to where it's hot enough to where it's affecting our stone material, but to where you can visibly see it. And then we have actual scuppers that cross over in front of the fire that spill back into the swimming pool. So, even if you have everything on at the same time with the fire and the water, you can still see the trees in the background. Whereas if they're all off, it's just a nice little peekaboo window there. They really love that part of it. That's one of the things that sold the job. The rest of it, we just wanted to make really clean so that you could really focus on the rest of the property. Because when we first arrived, it looked like the property was, the backyard was bigger than this room, but it looked like the backyard was the size of these front tables because of all the trees. So once we were able to remove all of the trees, we took the coping off, created the negative edge to where you really get a reflection of those trees on the water, and the feature wall in this kind of gets out of the way of the rest of the panoramic view of the backyard, but still creates at an angle a very cool focal wall that creates some movement and things like that.
So you segue to fire, now we're going to fire features.
There you go.
So my job is to keep us on time, obviously, so we'll have to tighten up each a little bit because I want to make sure there's time for questions. So just, I don't want to short anybody on their story, but.
So my fire feature here, which you don't see on the left side of this photo, we actually kind of
Yours is in the center there,
Yeah,
right?
mine is in the center. Inside the house is a kind of a reflection of this fire feature in the main living room in the house, which was existing when we got there. And so we actually used the same porcelain tile material that they had on the house interior and carried that through to the outside. One of the fun things about doing these fire features outside to create, what has the appearance of a fireplace, it's really just a linear fire burner that you could use in any fire pit outside. And it allows us to do a fireplace look without having to install a chimney and go to all of that trouble and expense, as long as our tile that's surrounding this can withstand the heat of that fire. Just allows us a lot more freedom in creativity with these fire features.
My image is on the left, and as you can see, all three of these fire features are uniquely different from one another. Fire's become an integral part of the pool and outdoor environment. I mean, it's just another feature that people are always asking for. It's on their wish list. The other one that's been pretty spectacular, and like the last image I had shown, was the sunken seating areas. And this one's particular, that the client they wanted fire, and they thought they wanted something unique. We showed them a sunken fire feature, but not only just a sunken fire feature, but something that was surrounded by water, because you get that reflected light off the top of that water surface. And just any material you're showcasing, whether it's stone or porcelain or tile, it's just going to really glow when it comes to that. Mm-hmm. But the sunken fire pits, real quick, I think is a phenomenon that's really happened a lot in the high-end residential market right now. Is like I tell a client, I mean, we're all used to seeing it at a 5-foot elevation, right? So imagine at 5 inches, like a wiener dog, at the ground. And when you sink yourself and immerse yourself in these situations, and you're looking across the water, some clients, after they get these done, they sit in like, oh my gosh, I've never seen a pool in this environment, or my backyard for that matter. It completely opens your mind to another perspective. All of our lives we have this vantage point up here, but a lot of times when you see really cool photographs, it's because the photographer's taking the time to get on their stomach or get crouched down and get that angle that you're not used to seeing, and that's why it's spectacular. So a lot of clients, when they're looking at our photographs, they don't understand what's so cool about them, but it's either vertical interest or vertical drama. In this case, we're sinking it down to create that drama. So that's what's unique about sunken fire pits in this particular application.
Mine is on the right. We're also using porcelain as the veneer for that. Those are actual copper fire bowls. We actually have ours fabricated out of Scottsdale. A lot of what I've learned recently is, not just a fire pit that you're sitting around, but also using it in a nighttime environment for illumination and, kind of soften hard edges, with the fire itself. And that's what this was intended to do. This is on a tiered pool that tiers up several levels, and essentially these look great during the day. They patina, they give a kind of a turquoise edge on the corners, which matches the actual pool color. But at night, when these things are on, it illuminates the full length of that wall and really creates more of a focal point than seeing just all of the tiers. Because when you walk out into this backyard, they've got 13 feet of elevation within 20 feet of their house. So it just goes really steep, really tall. So it's easy to get lost in the tiers of how this thing was built. but at night it creates a centralized focal point where the fire is because of not only the dancing flame, but the actual illumination around the porcelain and everything, during that nighttime environment.
So why don't you go ahead and take, Bo, your next one, we'll work back
So
this
my
way.
next one, the centerpiece is mine. We actually custom fabricated a fire bar in that circular pattern, and what that area right there, it's actually surrounding a perimeter overflow spa that's right in the center of that. So as they're in their spa, which again, we try to create that mirror finish on a perimeter overflow, they're able to set their soda, their beer, whatever, right there on a hard surface. They can feel the actual heat in the wintertime because they're in close enough proximity. I do warn, ladies, watch your hair, because it is within, 24 inches, you're having a couple wine glasses and you lean back. Part of the education process, making sure you know what you got out there. But we wrapped it in fire, and then the actual perimeter around the overflow spa is illuminated in LED. So the inside, and again, this is a porcelain stack that we use. The inside of that is illuminated as well. So you have the fire, then you have the reflective surface, and then you have the illumination in the what we would call the canal. And again, daytime, nighttime really turned out well.
Mine's on the left, just really quickly. The pool had a chevron shape on the outer infinity edge, so we wanted to replicate that and also take some of the architectural element. The roof structure also has that same kind of aesthetic, so we just wanted to replicate that, break it up into 2 different zones, but this is a dimensional stack stone, so dry set.
And I think all 3 of these are really showcasing how it's so easy now to create any kind of custom fire feature. You don't have to be confined to something that's on the market. For mine, the photo on the right, that's a raised spa area behind those floating stepper pads, and you've got that water feature. Unlike Bo, I don't want my clients to catch on fire, so I raise the fire up a little bit. But actually, the yard steps up and there's a little seating area behind that fire pit, so you can be in the spa enjoying the fire or sitting in the dry space. But this is an example where we were using the limestone for the coping, and you can see just off to the side in that photo, the limestone carries down on the wall, but I held it back away from the water so that I don't have the discoloration on that limestone. And behind that water feature, utilized a 3D porcelain tile to give us some nice texture behind that waterfall.
So I'm hearing a theme here. The limestone has got its place, but the porcelain tile is making its way in and replacing some of that. So let's talk about the most stressful area that our products can go into, whether it's glass or porcelain or whatever. The Infinity Edge is sort of the highest bar, the highest stress of any application. So these are your pictures. We can go start, Randy.
One of the things that I wanted to mention on Infinity Edges, your color selection is very important depending on how you want. The whole purpose of that Infinity Edge is to get that glass smooth water that just kind of fades off into the horizon. And if you want that water surface to act as a mirror, which is often what we're trying to do, you want to go into those darker colors, with whether it's plaster or an all-tile pool. So that the darker you go with those color tones, the more of a mirror kind of an effect you're going to get off the top of that water. I typically use, for the top portion of that Infinity Edge, a larger format, super smooth material, whether it be a granite or a large format porcelain tile. Just to give us the cleanest, smoothest overflow that we can get. But obviously there's a lot of different materials that you can use there.
Yeah, my image is on the left. This was a perimeter overflow with an Infinity Edge overlooking a lake property. So the Infinity Edge is large format, through body porcelain tile. The top of the beam is a glass mosaic. The challenge that we have as designers, because unlike Bo, where he designs but also implements what he's designing, we don't sometimes have the control over the contractors that are selected for the project. So on this particular project, expansion joints, we live in Kansas City. We not only have the heat, we also have the expansion and contraction during the winter time. So they did have some delamination on this exterior Infinity Edge. It had to go back and be replaced. But again, it's having the right team all the way through the process. The design, detailing, the contractor, and the people overlooking the project to make sure it gets implemented the right way. And it sustains for a long period of time.
I'm going to also piggyback on what Kurt said about, as a builder and, as a designer that's pitching someone in California or someone in Florida and you live in Texas. Not understanding the hydraulics of how this works can be very, very disruptive to the design. If you have a builder that's putting returns on the negative edge side and they're facing upwards, you're going to get turbulence on that water unless you just turn the entire system off, and then you don't have overflow. And so understanding the right size for your hydraulics and things like that is very important in accomplishing what you see in that center picture, which is perfectly still water. Randy's 100% right about the reflective surfaces. Mine's on the right there. We actually use an Oceanside tile, and it performed great. But one of the issues that we were having is this tile was selected by the homeowner without our advisement. They saw it somewhere. It was a completely translucent tile. That is the most difficult tile to install because you can see right through it, all the way through it. You can see any type of imperfection whatsoever, and it could have performance issues due to molding and things like that. And so we advised against it. We actually had them sign a waiver. My masons did an exceptional job installing it, but there were some areas of concern that we did have to go back and we did have to replace some tile on because you almost have to be 100% perfect in a completely translucent environment like that. And so, material selections are absolutely imperative to not only the overall design, but the performance of what you're trying to accomplish as well.
So this will be our last slide. So you each have like a minute on this for each of yours, and then we're going to open it up to some questions to try to stay on time.
Yeah. So mine, this is another angle of the same project in the previous image, and just kind of highlighting the difference between, the top of that Infinity Edge. I used a large format black or charcoal gray material, but then on the face of it, since this pool had a very odd angular kind of shape to it, simply used a 2x24 Mosa tile for the face on that Infinity Edge that gives a nice finish out to it.
My image is on the bottom. It had the reflective view over the Infinity Edge over this lake.
Look at that reflection.
Yeah, it turned out wonderful.
Melts into the lake, doesn't it?
But the challenge on this project, though, is that the client wanted large format material. We didn't want to see a lot of joints. We'd guide in that direction. But then when you're working with natural stone, you have limitations. The quarry can only block out certain size that they can guarantee. So we maxed out what we could with the core that we were working with, and we had 4,000 feet of pool deck to cover in a short period of time to get it out of the quarry. So we had limitations on how fast they could work, but also what was available. That's what I love about porcelain tile now. This was 7-8 years ago, but now porcelain tile, you can get 4x4 sheets or larger, and our clients love the fact that there's fewer joints, a lot more the fact it's consistency all the way through, and it's just a really durable product. So that's where today we might have shown them a little bit different product.
Mine's on the upper right side. This is another picture of that tiered pool that we were talking about earlier. The pool initially was designed for an overflow across the front, and due to budgetary restraints, we had to pull that. But the client absolutely loved the spa look. So what we had to do with this was actually have two different systems. There was a system for the spa that has its own pump filter. It's completely independent of the swimming pool because initially they shared a catch basin. And so when we removed that catch basin and none of the pool flowed into that catch basin, there was no way to integrate the two bodies of water. So we had to do two different systems there. Again, this was a black Oceanside that we used on the actual spa itself. And we use actual limestone on those columns that you see, and the columns go all the way to the floor. So they're about 8 foot tall, and then they're about 7 foot deep. So they're 15 feet of limestone, which again, from learning from previous mistakes, we sealed that limestone generously, and it's 5 years old now. It's performed great. The rest of the material is all porcelain, and we've had no issues at all with it.
Okay, so I really want to thank you guys for doing this today. I appreciate the opportunity to get in front of our industry and bring sort of a new level. You know, that's a lot of us has never really seen any of this before, unless you have it in your backyard and you're that fortunate. But I wanted to open it up for questions and see if you have anything for these guys as far as talking to them about experiences, you know, things like that maybe will help you, particularly in your challenges on what you might do.
So you guys are doing a lot of the linear burners. Are you using trays, like the burner sits in a tray and then you fill it with the glass or whatever?
Yeah, I could speak to that because I learned from experience. The very first one I did probably 10 years ago where we were getting into custom burners, we were using a natural limestone, a dimensional stone adjacent to this burner. And we did a stainless steel tray, and we were trying to protect that edge. And then the burner, and then we had glass rock in that. The challenge we're having is the heat was still dissipating. It was hitting that tray and going out, and we were seeing micro cracks on the limestone. So we developed a new detail where we actually have like a tray within a tray to almost create like a gap, an air gap that goes around that outer ledge. You have two edges of stainless. So when that inner tray is heating up, it's not getting to the outer one. And since we did that starting like 10 years ago, we've not had any issues.
Is there venting between the two trays?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Heat throwing that air up.
It's like a radiator. I mean, you got a fan, and that's what made me think of it. But doing something unique like that, just a little bit different. It's added more cost to the projects, but it's solved the issue because we saw that cracking happen. So, yeah.
Any other questions? We have 2 minutes. Anything?
What about calcium buildup on the water line?
I'm sorry?
The
What about
calcium.
buildup on the water line? Is there anything that you?
I would look to the builder on
I'm
that
using,
one.
yeah, I'm using the epoxy products. Right now, we're using Litocol for almost everything that we're doing, adhesion and grout based. And the epoxy doesn't have the same calcium properties that the cementitious does. So whether your water's, scaling because of too much calcium or etching because of too little, it's going to pull it out of the cementitious. So what we found is that the epoxies has been a really good solution for that. And with large panel, because of this show and a lot of shows that are coming up, a lot of folks are going to start using large panel. I've had failures with cementitious grout on large panel, and I've had 0 failures with epoxy on large panel. So I'm a big believer in the epoxy products. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but if you contact the provider of these epoxies and the manufacturers, they're more than willing to either give you the screen time and the advisement on what to do, or what we did, we flew out to the facility and we looked at the facility, and the guys in the lab coat showed us exactly what to do, and that type of training for me has been priceless. And that's what, if I were just coming into this industry, my advice would be get with the vendors, get with the manufacturers of the products, and talk to them about the very best adhesion methods for that material. That way, even if you don't select that exact product, you'll understand why they want that adhesion method the way that it is. And for the calcium, I found that epoxy is the best.
Thanks. We reached our time, so I appreciate you guys coming. They will be available for personal questions, for the next few minutes for sure. But as far as the presentation, we've reached the 9 o'clock mark, so I appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.